The throne room of Caervale had been built to humble kings, its ceiling vaulted so high that torchlight could not reach the rafters, and the great wolves of the founding pack stared down from murals worn dim by 700 years of incense and grief. 200 candles burned along the colonnades. 1,000 wolves stood beneath them, robed and silent, and not a single one of them would meet the eyes of the man on the dais. Vandren Halloway, Alpha King of the Iron Reach, stood alone at the head of his court and waited to be rejected for the 4th time. He did not move. He had learned not to move. The smallest shift of his shoulders, the smallest flicker of breath, sent the candidates flinching like deer in a thicket. So he stood with his hands at his sides and his chin lifted, the iron crown heavy on his brow, and he watched the 7 women who had been brought from their fathers' houses to refuse him. They knelt in a line at the base of the dais, daughters of the high houses, every one of them: Pelham, Brevard, Ostwin, Caradoc, Marsh, Hellstrom, Quintain. The oldest bloodlines of the Iron Reach, summoned by royal writ to present themselves for the choosing, because tradition demanded that a king who had reached his 30th year must take a queen, and tradition could be bent for nothing, not even for a king the kingdom had begun to call the cursed wolf. The High Speaker, an old man named Autric, whose voice had once been famous for its music and now creaked like a hinge, lifted his staff and struck it 3 times against the marble. "By the writ of the founding," Autric intoned, "and by the right of the choosing, the candidates may now decline." It was a perversion of the old ceremony. In the time of Vandren's grandfather, the candidates had stepped forward to be chosen from. Now they stepped forward to refuse, one by one, and the king was required by law to accept their refusal in silence. Vandren had drafted that law himself, 2 years ago. It was the only mercy he had been able to give them. The first to rise was the daughter of House Pelham. Her name was Senna, and she had been weeping since she crossed the threshold. Her father pushed her gently from behind, and she stumbled forward 3 steps and went to one knee, her white gown pooling around her like spilled milk. "My king," she whispered, "I cannot accept." "On what grounds?" Autric asked. The grounds did not matter. The law required only that they be spoken aloud. Senna's hands trembled in her lap. She did not lift her eyes. "On the grounds," she said, "that I wish to live." A murmur ran through the colonnades. Not surprise. None of them were surprised. Only the particular shame of having heard it spoken plainly. Vandren inclined his head. The smallest gesture, permission to withdraw. Senna rose and fled. The second was the daughter of House Brevard. The third, Caradoc. The 4th, Marcia. Each one knelt. Each one declined. Each one gave a reason that was no reason at all, and Vandren bowed his head to each, and the colonnades grew thicker with the silence of a kingdom watching its king be refused by the only women in the realm whose blood was high enough to share his bed. 3 women remained. It was at this moment, as the daughter of House Hellstrom rose to her feet, that the great doors at the far end of the hall opened. They opened only a hand's breadth. A draft of cold air slipped through, ruffling the candle flames, and a figure slipped through with it. A woman in a gray traveling cloak, her hood drawn so low that her face was only the suggestion of a face. She moved along the wall like someone who had spent her life learning not to be seen, and she stopped behind the last pillar in the eastern colonnade, and she pressed her back against the stone and went still. No one noticed her. 200 candles, 1,000 wolves, and not one of them turned. But Vandren noticed. He did not know why. He should not have been able to see her at that distance, in that shadow, with her hood drawn. But something behind his ribs went very quiet, the way a room goes quiet when a door is opened on a winter wind, and he found that his eyes had moved without his permission and were fixed on the small gray shape behind the pillar. She did not look at him. He could not look away. The daughter of House Hellstrom, whose name was Piran, was speaking. Vandrin did not hear her. He heard instead the sound his own pulse made in his ears, which was a sound he had not heard since he was a boy of 9, the night before the curse had taken him. "Look at me," he thought, and was horrified at himself. The woman behind the pillar shifted her weight. Her hood slid back the smallest fraction. He saw, very briefly, the line of a jaw. "On the grounds," Piran Hellstrom was saying, "that my mother would not survive my disappearance." A few of the wolves in the colonnades laughed under their breath. Bitter laughter. Piran's mother, it was widely known, had hanged herself the previous winter. The grounds were a lie, and everyone knew it, and the king would still be required to accept it. Vandrin tore his eyes from the gray cloak and inclined his head. "You may withdraw," he said. His voice came out lower than he meant it to. Piran flinched as if struck. She rose and fled, and the daughter of House Ostwin rose in her place, and Vandrin found his gaze had returned, all on its own, to the pillar. The hood had slipped further. He could see now the curve of a cheekbone, the line of a throat. He could not see her eyes. The daughter of House Ostwin was a small girl of 17. Her name was Velis. She had been weeping so hard that her face was swollen and her father had to hold her up. When she knelt, her knees gave under her, and she made a sound that was not a word, and was instead the sound a snared animal makes when it finally accepts the snare. "My king," she gasped. "Please, please." The colonnades held their breath. Vandrin felt the curse stir. It was always there, just under his skin, a slow heat like a banked fire that he had spent 21 years learning to keep banked. But sometimes, when grief or rage or shame was sharp enough, the heat behind his ribs gathered, and his skin grew warm, and his shadow on the marble lengthened, and the candidates who had come too close would scream and turn and run for the doors with their gowns torn and their voices broken. He felt it stir now. He felt the warmth gather along his spine. He saw the girl Velis lift her wet face and look at him for the first time, and he saw her pupils blow wide with the animal terror that he had grown so tired of inspiring that he had begun to think of it as a sort of weather. "Speak the grounds," Autric said gently, because even Autric was tired. "I cannot," Velis whispered. "I cannot say it. Please do not make me say it. You must say it. He will burn me." She was crying so hard the words came apart in her mouth. Everyone says he burns them. From the inside. That is why no one will. Please." The colonnades had gone perfectly still. Vandrin closed his eyes. He had heard versions of this. He had heard the rumor in inn-yards and seen it scrawled on the underside of bridges. "The cursed wolf burns his women from the inside. He has killed 3 already. His seed is fire." None of it was true. He had never lain with a woman in his life. He had been 29 years old at the last full moon, and the curse had kept him untouched and untouching since the night his 9th year ended, and he had stopped trying, 2 summers ago, to explain. But he had never heard it spoken in his own throne room, not aloud, not to his face. A small sound came from the eastern colonnade. It was not a gasp. It was not a sob. It was a single, low, indrawn breath, as if someone had been struck in the stomach and was trying not to let the room hear. Vandrin opened his eyes. The woman behind the pillar had stepped half a pace forward. Her hood was still up. He could not see her face, but her hands had come out from under her cloak, and they were small hands, brown from sun, and the left one was pressed flat against the pillar as if she needed the stone to keep her standing. She was looking at him. He could not see her eyes. He knew this with the part of his mind that was still rational. The hood was too low. The shadow was too deep. The distance was too great. But she was looking at him, and he could feel it the way a sleeping man feels the dawn come up against his closed eyes. The curse stilled. It was the strangest thing. The banked heat under his ribs, which had been rising toward a flare, simply went quiet, as if it had heard something it recognized, as if it had been called by its true name. Vandrin forgot, for one whole breath, that he was the cursed wolf. He was a man, standing on a dais, and a stranger in a gray cloak was looking at him from behind a pillar, and the room around him had gone the kind of soft that he had not felt since his mother used to sing him to sleep. "Velis Ostwin," Autrec said, somewhere very far away. "You must speak the grounds." "I cannot," Velis sobbed. "My king," Autrec said, "she must speak the grounds, or the refusal cannot be entered." Vandrin did not answer. He was watching the pillar. The hood lifted just a fraction, just enough for the edge of the candlelight to catch on the underside of a chin and the parted line of a mouth. Then, slowly, slowly, as if she was stepping into deep water and could not be sure of the bottom, the woman in the gray cloak lifted her face. She looked at him. She looked him in the eyes. Vandrin Halloway, Alpha King of the Iron Reach, the cursed wolf, the man whom no woman in 7 kingdoms would consent to wed, looked back into a pair of eyes he had never seen before in his waking life, and felt, with the absolute certainty of a wolf who has heard his own true name spoken in the dark, that he had been looking for them since the day he was born. The candles in the colonnades guttered all at once, as if a great hand had passed over them. Then the great doors at the far end of the hall slammed open with such force that the bronze hinges screamed, and a man in the dust-streaked livery of the Southern Border Guard staggered into the throne room with blood on his hands and a sealed letter clutched against his chest, and he fell to his knees on the marble and gasped, my king, the riders have crossed the Vesh. They are inside the Reach. They are looking for her." And every wolf in the throne room turned, not toward the messenger, toward the eastern colonnade, toward the pillar, where a woman in a gray cloak was already running. Her name, though no one in the throne room of Caervale knew it yet, was Isolde Thornemere. She had been running for 11 days. She ran now through the colonnades of a king's hall with the same economy she had used through swamp and pine wood and the broken country south of the Vesh, head down, breath held, and weight on the balls of her feet. She did not look back. Looking back was for people who had time. She had used the last of her time the moment she had let him see her face. The northern corridor branched twice before the kitchens. She knew this because she had memorized the floor plan of Caervale Keep on the road, copying it from a peddler's almanac by the light of a tallow candle in the back of a hay cart, and she had been doing this kind of memorization since she was 11 years old, and she had gotten good at it. She took the first branch left. A serving boy with a tray of empty wine cups stared at her, open-mouthed. She did not stop. The second branch right, past a tapestry of the founding that was older than her grandfather, down 3 steps that she had to take in one stride to keep her speed. Behind her, a long way behind her, she could hear the king's hall erupting. She did not let herself hear it. The herb store was where the almanac had said it would be. A small door, half hidden behind a curtain of dried sage, with a latch on the inside and a window that opened on the kitchen yard. She slipped through. She locked the latch. She crossed the room in 3 strides, opened the window, and was halfway out of it before she remembered, with the small, cold shock of someone realizing they have left a child behind, that she had forgotten to breathe out. She breathed out. She climbed onto the sill, turned, and dropped into the yard. The yard was empty. It was the dinner hour, and the undercooks had gone in to serve. A single dog, a long-bodied gray hound chained to the spit house, lifted its head and looked at her. It did not bark. It put its head back down, slowly, as if it had decided she was not its problem. Isolde crossed the yard. She did not run. Running in a yard would draw eyes. She walked the way a kitchen girl walks when she has been sent on an errand she does not want to do, and she went out through the postern gate, and she was 3 streets into the lower city before her knees gave under her, and she had to lean against a cooper's wall to keep from falling. 11 days. 11 days of not stopping. And she had stopped now, in a king's city, after looking a king in the eyes. She pressed her forehead against the cool wood of the cooper's wall and closed her eyes and tried, for the first time since she had crossed the Vesh, to think. She had not meant to look at him. That was the thing she would have to come back to later, when she had time to be honest with herself. She had not meant to. The plan had been simple. Slip into the throne room during the choosing, when every guard in the keep would be watching the dais. Stay in the eastern colonnade, where the shadows were deepest. Wait until the ceremony broke, and then move with the dispersing crowd toward the upper galleries, where the almanac said there was a forgotten passage that led to the old aqueduct, which led to the river, which led, eventually, to the sea. The plan had not included looking at the king. The plan had especially not included the king looking back. Isolde pressed her palm against her mouth. She had seen, in that single stretched moment when their eyes had met, a great many things she did not know what to do with. She had seen a man who was very tired. She had seen a man who had not been touched in a long time. She had seen, beneath those things, something that had risen up inside her chest like an answering bell, and she did not know what the bell was, and she was afraid to find out. She had heard the rumors about him. Everyone in the 7 kingdoms had heard the rumors. The cursed wolf, the burning king. He killed his bride on the wedding night, and his second bride in the carriage on the way to the wedding, and his third bride before she could even leave her father's house. The rumors disagreed about the number, but they agreed about the principle. No woman could lie with him and live. She had also heard, because she had been raised by people who taught her to listen for the edge of a story, the things that the rumors did not say. That he had taken the throne at 22 and refused, at his coronation, to execute the bondsmen of his father's enemies. That he had personally ridden, in the Great Famine, to every village in the Iron Reach to oversee the distribution of the king's grain. That he had drafted with his own hand the law that allowed the high house daughters to refuse the choosing when no king before him had ever permitted such a thing. She had heard, in other words, that the cursed wolf was not what the rumors said. And then she had looked into his eyes, across 200 candles and 1,000 wolves, and she had felt the bell ring inside her chest. And now she was leaning against a cooper's wall in his city, with her plan in pieces, and her hands shaking. She straightened. She could not stay against the wall. The riders had crossed the Vesh. The messenger in the throne room had said it plainly, and she had heard him through the floor of her own panic, and she knew what it meant. They had found her track. They had ridden it down. They were inside the Reach now, and they were not bound by the Reach's laws, and they would kill her in a doorway and walk over her body without slowing. She had to get to the aqueduct. She pushed off the wall and made her legs move. The lower city of Caervale was a maze of slate roofs and tilting alleys, built down the slope of the bluff that the keep crowned. She moved through it with her hood down and her shoulders loose, trying to look like a girl who lived here. The almanac had not included the lower city. She was guessing now, by the slope of the streets, and the angle of the late sun, and she was guessing wrong twice before she saw the public well, that the almanac had said marked the corner of the Cooper's Lane. She turned. She walked another 3 blocks. She found, at the end of a dead-end alley, the iron grate that the almanac had said would let her into the old aqueduct. The grate was new. It was not the grate from the almanac. It was a heavy iron lattice, set deep into mortar that had not yet cured, and it had been padlocked with a lock the size of her fist. Someone, very recently, had closed this entrance. Isolde stared at it for the space of 3 heartbeats. Then she turned and walked, slowly, back the way she had come, and she did not let her face change, because in the alley behind her, leaning against the wall with his arms folded and a smile that had nothing kind in it, was a man she had hoped never to see again. His name was Carrick Vell. He had taught her, once, when she was 11, how to carry a knife in her boot without limping. He had been the closest thing she had to a teacher, in the years before her mother died. "Hello, little Wren," he said, in the voice he had used to tell her bedtime stories. "You have led us such a chase." Isolde did not run. Running here, in a dead-end alley, with Carrick between her and the only mouth of the street, would have been a child's mistake, and Carrick had taught her not to make children's mistakes when she was still young enough to be a child. She walked instead, until she was 4 paces from him, and she stopped, and she let her hands hang loose at her sides where he could see them. "Carrick," she said. "You should not have crossed the Veche," he said. "Your mother was very clear. North of the Veche was the limit. North of the Veche was the agreement." "My mother is dead." "Your mother is dead," he agreed, "and the agreement passed to her successor. And her successor wants you home, Isolde. You know she does. She has been very patient. She has been hunting me for 11 days. 11 days is patient for her." Isolde did not answer. She was thinking about the weight of the small knife in her boot, which Carrick would know about, because Carrick had taught her how to carry it. She was thinking about the angle of his shoulder against the wall, which was lazy in the way of a man who has done this before and expects to do it easily. She was thinking, under all of that, about the bell that had rung in her chest in the throne room, and how it was still ringing, very faintly, like a thing that had been struck once, and could not be made to stop. "What did you do in there?" Carrick asked. He had tilted his head. He was looking at her with the particular interest of a man who had noticed something he did not expect. "In where?" she said. "In the keep. We had eyes on the gates. You went in with the petitioner's line, and you came out of a kitchen window 20 minutes later, and in between, something happened. Something rang the bells." She did not let her face change. "There were no bells." "There were bells in me," Carrick said softly and tapped the place over his heart. "All the way down here. You did something in there, little wren. What did you do?" "I walked through a hall." "You walked through a hall?" "Yes." He smiled. "You were always such a poor liar," he said, "for a girl raised by what raised you." He came off the wall. He came off the wall slowly, the way a wolf comes off a wall when it has decided that the chase is no longer necessary, and Isolde had 3 breaths to choose between the knife in her boot and the impossible thing that had begun, very quietly, to happen inside her chest. The bell had not stopped ringing. It had, in fact, been growing louder. Since the moment she had stepped into the alley. Since the moment she had turned and seen Carrick. Since the moment she had understood, with the cold understanding that had kept her alive for 11 days, that she was about to die in this alley unless something changed. The bell was not a bell. It was a presence. It was the shape of someone, pressed up against the inside of her ribs, as if a man had laid his hand against the other side of a thin wall, and she was feeling, through the wall, the exact heat and weight of his palm. She knew, without knowing how she knew, whose palm. She turned her head, because she could not help it, and looked back down the alley toward the great dark shape of the keep on its bluff. The sun was low. The keep was a black silhouette against the bruised gold of the sky. He was looking for her. She felt it the way she would have felt a hand closing on the back of her neck. He was looking for her, and he was very close, and he was coming. Carrick had paused. He had felt something too, perhaps, or seen the change in her face. "Isolde," he said, and his voice was different now, less amused. "What is it you are not telling me?" She turned back to him. "Carrick," she said, "run." He blinked. "What?" "Run," she said again. "Now, while there is still time." His smile came back, but it was thinner. "Little wren." The mouth of the alley darkened. A shape was standing in it. A very large shape. A man, in the long black coat of a king who had ridden out of his own throne room without stopping for a cloak, and behind him, fanned out across the street, so that no one in the alley could leave it, were 6 wolves, with their heads low, and their eyes the color of old copper. Vandrin Holloway stepped into the alley. He did not look at Isolde. He looked at Carrick Vell, and the temperature of the alley dropped. "Step away from her," the Alpha King of the Iron Reach said quietly, "or I will have you taken apart where you stand, and they will not even find your teeth." Carrick Vell was not, by trade or by nature, a coward. He had ridden 3 campaigns under the banner of the woman who had raised Isolde, and he had killed 11 men in single combat, and he had walked, once, into a witch's house at midwinter to settle a debt, and walked out the same night with the witch's heart in a jar. He was 34 years old. He was a wolf of pure southern blood, and he had been told, since his first shift, that fear was a mistake other men made. He felt fear now. It came up from his stomach, cold and wet, and he had to lock his knees to keep from stepping back. He had heard, like everyone else, the stories about the cursed wolf. He had laughed at them in tavern yards, the seed of fire, the burned brides, the king who could kill with a glance. He had laughed because he was a wolf of pure southern blood, and wolves of pure southern blood did not believe in northern fairy tales. He stopped laughing. The man at the mouth of the alley was not a fairy tale. The man at the mouth of the alley was wearing a long black coat and a face that had decided something. And the air around him was wrong in a way Carrick could not name, the way the air is wrong above a forge before the iron is drawn. "My lord king," Carrick said, and his voice was steady, because his voice had always been the last thing to betray him. "You have made an error. This girl is a runaway from the southern houses. She is bound by contract to my mistress. I am within my rights to retrieve her. Step away from her. My lord king, the contract is older than the Reach's compact with the South. If you interfere, step away from her." Vandrin had not moved. He had not raised his voice. But the wolves behind him had shifted, all 6 of them at once, the way a single body shifts when its breath catches, and Carrick felt his own wolf turn over inside him like a sleeper on a sickbed, and try, weakly, to rise. He could not let his wolf rise. Not here. Not in front of this. "I will go," he said. "I will go, my lord king, and the matter of the girl will be referred to the Southern Compact, and—" "You will go," Vandrin said, "without her." "My lord." "You will go," Vandrin said, "without her. And you will tell whoever sent you that the next rider who crosses the Vesh in pursuit of this woman will be sent back across it in pieces small enough to fit in a saddlebag, and you will tell her, your mistress, that I know her name now. I did not know it an hour ago. I know it now. Tell her I know it." Carrick did not ask how the King of the Iron Reach had learned, in less than an hour, the name of a woman whose name was not spoken aloud even in her own household. He had stopped asking questions. He was using his remaining attention to back, very slowly down the wall. "Isolde," he said, without looking at her, because looking at her now would have cost him the wall. "Little Wren, whatever this is, you should know that she will not stop. She will not ever stop. There is no place in 7 kingdoms." "There is one," Vandrin said. He had still not looked at Isolde. "There is one place," he said, "in 7 kingdoms, where she will not reach. And it is the place this woman is now standing. Tell your mistress that also." Carrick reached the corner. He paused there, one hand on the brick. "My lord king," he said, almost gently, "you do not know what you are taking into your house." Vandrin turned his head finely and looked at him. Carrick fled. He did not run. He had too much pride for that. But he walked very quickly, and he did not look back, and the 6 wolves at the mouth of the alley parted to let him pass, and the alley was empty of him in less time than it took Isolde to draw a breath. Then the king and the runaway were alone, except for the wolves, and the alley was very quiet, and Isolde, who had been holding her body in the particular braced way that she had been holding it for 11 days, felt something inside her chest unlock, and she sat down, suddenly, hard, on the cold stones of the alley floor. Vandrin came toward her. He came toward her slowly, which she would understand later was a kindness. The kindness of a man who had spent his whole adult life learning that he frightened people and was trying not to frighten her. He stopped 6 paces away. He went down then, on one knee, on the alley stones, so that his face was lower than hers. "My lady," he said. His voice, this close, was different than it had been in the throne room. In the throne room, it had been the voice of a king. Here it was lower and quieter, and there was a roughness in it that she did not know how to read. "I am not your lady?" she said. "No," he agreed. "Not yet. But you are not what that man called you either. Little Wren? A runaway." She laughed. It came out cracked. "I am exactly a runaway," she said. "You are running from my lady. That is not the same as running." She looked at him. He had pale gray eyes. She had not been able to see the color of them in the throne room. They were the color of river ice on a morning when the ice is just about to break, and he was looking at her with the particular careful patience of a man who had been told all his life that his looking at things was dangerous. "They told me," she said, "that you burn women." He did not flinch. She watched for the flinch. It did not come. "Yes," he said. "They tell everyone that." "Is it true?" "No." "You have never lain with a woman?" "No." "Why?" He was silent for a long moment. The wolves at the mouth of the alley had sat down, all 6 of them, in a half-circle facing outward, which she understood, after a moment, was a guard. They were guarding the alley while their king knelt in it. "Because the curse on me," Vandren said slowly, "is not what they think it is. It is not a thing in my body. It is a thing in my blood. It was put on the Holloway line 9 generations ago, by a woman my great-great-grandfather wronged, and it is the simplest curse in the world, my lady. It is this. Until the king of the Holloway line is recognized by his true mate, his touch will burn what it touches. After that recognition, it will not. Recognized. Looked upon," he said. "Truly. Once. That is the whole of it? That is the whole of it." "Then why," she said, and her voice was not quite steady now, "are no women lining up to look at you?" He smiled. It was a small smile, and it transformed his face the way a small lamp transforms a dark room. "Because they have all been told," he said, "that to look upon me is to be burned. That is the rumor my enemies have spread, that the curse is in the eyes, that a woman who meets the cursed wolf's gaze will catch his fire and die of it. That is a clever rumor. It is. It has held for 9 generations. And no woman, in 9 generations. No woman in 9 generations has looked upon a Holloway king and not flinched." His voice was very even. "Until you." Isolde sat very still on the cold stones. She thought about the bell that had rung in her chest in the throne room. She thought about her mother, who had been dead 3 months, and her mother's mistress, who had hunted her for 11 days, and the contract that had been signed when Isolde was 9 years old, and the small knife in her boot that she had not, in the end, needed. She thought about the man kneeling in front of her, who had ridden out of his own throne room in the middle of his own choosing, because a stranger had looked at him. She thought about the fact that the bell, in her chest, was still ringing. "My Lord King," she said. "Vandren. Vandren," she said. "I think you should know, before you take me into your house. The riders who crossed the Vesh, the woman who sent them, my mother's mistress. She is not what you think she is. She is not a Southern lady. The Southern Compact was a lie. My mother's letter told me so before she died. The woman who has been hunting me. Isolde Thornemere." He said her full name. He said it the way a man says a word he has known all his life and has only just realized, today, what it meant. She closed her mouth. She had not given him her name. She had not told him any part of her name. The man in the alley had said Isolde, but the man in the alley had not said Thornmere, and there was no one in the Iron Reach who should have known to put those 2 words together. "How?" she said. "I do not know," Vandren said. "I knew it the moment you looked at me. I knew it the way a wolf knows the name of his own pup. I do not understand how. I only know it is true. Thornamere is not a southern name. No. Thornamere is a name from before the Reach was the Reach. Yes. The woman who has been hunting me, Isolde said very softly, is the last living matriarch of the Holloway line's old enemy. The line that placed the curse. She has been raising me since I was 9 years old to be the weapon that finishes what her great-great-grandmother started. I was sent here, my Lord King. I was sent here to look you in the eyes, not to free you, to finish you. The curse has a second clause. If the recognition is false, if the woman who looks upon the king does not love him, the burning does not stop. It moves. It moves into him. It will kill him, slowly, over the course of a single moon. She drew a long breath. I did not know, she said, until I crossed the Veche and read my mother's last letter. I did not know what I was. My mother spent her whole life keeping me from knowing. She died to keep me from knowing. I crossed the Veche because I would rather die in a foreign country than be the thing I was made to be. And then I came into your hall, my Lord King, because the only place in your kingdom that the riders would not look for me was the room where the king himself was standing. And I looked at you. I looked at you because I could not help it. And now. She stopped. She could not finish the sentence. Vandren was very still. The wolves at the mouth of the alley were very still. The whole alley, the whole city, the whole great bruised gold sky over Caervale was very still, and Isolde Thornamere, who had run for 11 days and crossed 3 rivers and looked the cursed wolf in the eyes, sat on the alley stones and waited to be told what she had done. And now, Vandren said quietly, you do not know whether the recognition was true. She nodded. She could not speak. You do not know whether you love me? She nodded again. Because, he said, and his voice was so gentle that she had to close her eyes, you have known me for 1 hour, and the bell in your chest is the only evidence you have, and the bell in your chest could be the curse, or it could be the answer to the curse, and if it is the curse, then in 1 moon I will be dead, and you will have done what you were raised to do. Yes, she whispered. He was silent for a long time. Then he said, may I ask you a question? Yes. When you looked at me, he said, in the throne room, what did you feel? She opened her eyes. He had not moved. He was still on 1 knee in the alley, 6 paces from her, with his hands open at his sides where she could see them. He was looking at her with the same careful patience, and his eyes were the gray of river ice, and the bell in her chest had not stopped, had not slowed, had only grown, very slowly, into something that was no longer a bell, but a low, warm note like the sound of a struck cello. I felt, she said, and her voice broke, as if I had come home to a house I had never seen before. Vandren closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet. Then I think, my lady, he said, that we will know within the moon, and if it is the curse, I will spend the moon glad. And if it is not the curse, I will spend my life glad. Either way. He held out his hand. It was, she realized, the first time she had ever seen him offer his hand to anyone. There was a faint tremor in it. The hand of a man who had not been touched in 21 years. Either way, he said. Will you come with me? A wind moved down the alley. It was the cold wind that came off the Veche at sundown, the wind that had carried her here for 11 days, and it lifted the edges of his coat and the edges of her cloak, and it carried, very faintly, the sound of hoofbeats from a great distance. The riders had not given up. The riders, or others like them, were already inside the city. Isolde Thornamere reached out her hand, and she took the hand of the cursed wolf, and she felt his palm against hers, warm and rough and unburned, for the first time in either of their lives. Behind them, far away on the bluff, the great bell of Caervale Keep began, slowly, to toll. It was tolling the alarm. The bell was not a single voice, it was 3. The high bell of the keep tolled first, in the clear note that meant attend, and beneath it the middle bell of the merchant's quarter answered, deeper and slower, in the note that meant close your shutters, and beneath that the great bell of the river gate, the oldest bell in Caer Vale, began the long iron strokes that meant the city is not safe. Isolde knew the bells. She had memorized those too, on the road, from a dog-eared pamphlet that a barge captain had given her in exchange for the binding of a wound. She had not expected to hear all three on the same evening. The pamphlet had said, in its cramped print, that the third bell had not been struck in 40 years. "They are inside the walls," Vandren said. He was already moving. He did not let go of her hand. He drew her up from the stones with a strength that did not show in his shoulders, and he turned, and the 6 wolves at the mouth of the alley turned with him in one motion, as if they were not 6 wolves, but a single body with 12 eyes, and the alley emptied into the street, and the street emptied toward the bluff. And they were running, all of them, before Isolde had quite understood that they had begun. The lower city had begun to close. Shutters slammed shut overhead. A cooper hauled his cart in off the cobbles and barred his shop door. Somewhere, a child was crying, the steady, startled crying of a child who has seen its parents go pale. The wind off the Veche had stiffened. It carried the smell of horse sweat, and something else. Something faintly chemical that Isolde recognized after 3 breaths, and which made her stumble. "Wolf's root," she gasped. Vandren did not slow. "What?" "They are burning wolf's root, in the lower quarters, to dull your wolves' noses. They have done this before, in the south." He did not ask her how she knew. He did not ask her how she could be certain. He simply lifted his free hand, made a small economical gesture that she did not understand, and the wolf nearest his right side broke from the formation and bolted down a side street with its tail low, carrying the message to wherever the message was carried. "They will not catch the scent of the riders," she said, "not while the wolf's root is burning." "Then we do not need their noses tonight," Vandren said. "We have something better." "What?" "You." She nearly missed her step. He steadied her without breaking pace. "Me?" she said. "They are not hunting in random patterns, my lady. They are hunting you. They will go where you are. We do not need to find them. We need only to bring you somewhere they cannot follow, and they will come to that place, and we will be waiting. Where I am cannot be followed." "The keep." "The keep is where I just left." "The keep is where the alarm bell is now ringing," he said, "and the keep is where, in the next quarter hour, every wolf of the inner pack will be at the walls, and the keep is the one place in the iron reach that the woman who has been hunting you cannot send a rider into. Not tonight. Not while I am inside it." She wanted to argue. She had spent 11 days believing that walls were lies, that thresholds were lies, that any roof could be lifted off a sleeping woman by men with enough silver and enough hate. She did not argue. She had used up her arguing, somewhere on the road, and she let him pull her up the long climb of the keep road, with her breath ragged in her chest and the bell tolling above them, and the bell of the merchant's quarter tolling below. Halfway up the bluff, she understood that she was being carried. He had not picked her up. There had been no word about it, but her feet were no longer quite finding the stones, and his arm was no longer quite holding her hand. It was around her waist, lifting her, and her cheek was against the wool of his coat, and she could feel, through the wool, the slow, heavy beat of his heart, which was a heart that was running too, but in a different rhythm than her own, like 2 horses keeping pace down the same road. She did not protest. She had not been carried since she was 7 years old. "My Lord King," she said, into the wool of his coat. Vandren. Vandren, I am very tired. I know. I do not know if I can do whatever it is you mean to do tonight." "You will not have to. I will if it is needed." "It is not needed," he said, "and it will not be needed, And you will sleep tonight under the only roof in the iron reach that I can promise you, and you will sleep the whole night, and in the morning we will see what is to be done. I have not slept a whole night in 11 days. I know. How do you know? He was quiet for a long moment. She felt the rhythm of his stride change as he took the last steep turn before the keep gate. Because, he said, I have not slept a whole night in 21 years, and I know the weight of a body that has not slept. I know it the way I know my own name. She closed her eyes. The keep gate opened ahead of them. She did not see it open. She heard the iron groan of the great hinges and felt the change in the air as they passed under the arch, and then the gate was closing behind them with a sound like a tomb ceiling, and Vandren Halloway carried Isolde Thornmere across the inner courtyard of his own keep with his face set, and his eyes forward, and 100 wolves of the inner pack falling into formation around them as they passed. The chamber he carried her to was not a guest chamber. She understood that only when he set her down, very carefully, on the edge of the bed inside it, and she opened her eyes and saw the room. It was a king's chamber. It was austere in the way that a man who has lived alone makes a room austere. No rugs except a single one before the hearth. No hangings. A single high window, a single chair by the fire. But it was also lived in a way she had not expected. There were books on the chair. There was a wooden bowl on the mantel with 3 river stones in it, the kind of stones a child collects. There was, hanging on a peg by the door, a heavy gray cloak with a place near the collar where the wool had been worn thin, as if a man had pressed his thumb against that spot every time he put it on, for years. It was a room a man slept in. It was the room a man would carry a woman into only if he meant to give her his bed. My Lord King, she said. Vandren. Vandren, this is your chamber. Yes. I cannot sleep in your chamber. You will sleep wherever you choose to sleep, my lady, but this is the only room in the keep I trust tonight. Why? He hesitated. She watched him decide whether to lie. She watched him decide not to. Because, he said slowly, the woman who has been hunting you has had a generation to plant her people in my walls. She cannot have planted them in this room. I have slept in this room every night for 21 years, and the wolf in me knows the scent of every flagstone, and there is no scent in this room tonight that should not be here. And tomorrow night, he said, I will know more than I know tonight. She nodded. She was too tired to keep the conversation going. She was too tired, in fact, to keep her eyes open, and she did not realize this until she felt his hand at her shoulder, very light, easing her down onto the pillow. Sleep, my lady, he said. Where will you sleep? In the chair. That chair is not a bed. I have slept in worse. I will not sleep if you sleep in a chair. He paused. She had said it without thinking. She had said it the way she would have said anything else her body chose to say at the end of an 11-day flight, and she heard it after she had said it, and she did not take it back. He did not move toward her. He moved instead to the chair, and he sat down in it, and he leaned his head back against the wood, and he closed his eyes. I will sleep in the chair, he said, and I will not move from this chair while you are in this room. That is my promise. If you need me, I will be in the chair. If you do not, I will still be in the chair. Sleep, my lady. She watched him for a long time. The hearth flickered low. A cool draft moved at the high window. The bell of the river gate, far away, was still tolling. The long iron strokes coming slower now, and she understood that the city was holding its breath and waiting for whatever was going to happen next. And she understood that she would be asleep before it happened, and she understood that this was the first night in 11 days, and perhaps in the 11 years before those 11 days, that she had felt safe. The bell in her chest had not stopped. It was a quieter bell now. It was the sound a struck note makes when it has wrung itself out into the wood of the instrument and become part of the instrument. And she lay on the king's pillow with her face turned toward the chair, and watched the firelight on the line of his jaw. And she thought that if this was the curse, she was sorry. And if this was not the curse, she was sorrier, because either way she was about to fall asleep loving him, and she did not yet know him at all. Then she fell asleep. She did not see him open his eyes again. She did not see him get up, very quietly, an hour later, and cross the room, and stand beside the bed for a long moment looking down at her face. She did not see him reach out, very slowly, and lay the back of one finger against her temple, the lightest touch a man can give without quite touching, the way a man tests for the warmth of a lamp without burning his finger. She did not see his face when he found that the touch had not burned her. She did not see him sink to his knees beside the bed and press his forehead against the edge of the mattress and weep, in absolute silence, for the space of 3 full breaths. She did not see, later, the small thing he did then, which was to draw a single hair, a long brown hair from her pillow, and wind it twice around the smallest finger of his left hand, like a wedding ring made of nothing, and tuck his hand into his coat. She did not see him return to the chair and sit in it and watch her sleep until dawn. Down the corridor, in the small hours of the night, a sealed letter was pushed under the carved oak door of the king's chamber. It was sealed in wax the color of dried blood, and the sigil pressed into it was a circle within a circle, with a single thorn cutting across both circles, and no one in the Iron Reach had seen that sigil for 9 generations. The letter, written in a hand that was old and careful and amused, read, "My king, the girl is mine. You will return her by sunset on the 3rd day, or I will burn your keep with you in it. I have waited 9 generations. 3 days is generous. Madre Vorn." She woke to the smell of bread. It was a particular bread, dense and dark and faintly sweet, and Isolde knew it the moment she smelled it, because it was the bread of the high country. The bread her mother had baked every winter when Isolde was small. She had not eaten it in 9 years. It was not made anywhere south of the Veche. She opened her eyes. The room was full of morning. A pale gold light slanted through the high window, and the hearth had burned down to a steady red bed, and the chair by the fire was empty. For a heartbeat, she did not breathe. Then she saw him. He was sitting on the floor. He had moved, sometime in the small hours, from the chair to the rug, and he was sitting cross-legged with his back against the foot of the bed, and his head was tipped forward. And he was asleep. His coat was off. He was in a plain dark shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, and she could see, on the inside of his right forearm, a long pale scar that ran from his wrist almost to the crook of his arm, and she could see, around the smallest finger of his left hand, a single hair wound twice and tucked under itself, and she knew, with a kind of slow, soft falling in her chest, whose hair it was. She lay still and looked at him. He was younger asleep. She had thought him a man of 32, perhaps 33. But asleep he was clearly only 29, and the lines around his mouth were not lines of age, but lines of a man who had spent his 20s not sleeping, and the curve of his lashes against his cheek was, she discovered with a small hot shock, the curve of a person she could love. She loved him a little already. She had known this last night, in the soft slide before sleep, but it had been the love of a person at the end of her endurance, and that was a kind of love that did not always survive morning. This was morning. The bell in her chest had not stopped. The bell in her chest was a low, warm hum, and she was looking at him, and she knew that the love had survived. She did not yet know if it was love enough to break the curse. She did not know how anyone would know until the moon turned. A soft knock came at the door. Vandren did not move. The knock had been pitched to a frequency that would not wake him, and Isolde realized, with the part of her mind that had been trained since girlhood to read household systems, that this was a household that had learned, over 21 years, how not to wake its king when its king had finally slept. She sat up. She drew the coverlet around her shoulders. She crossed the rug on bare feet, opened the door a hand's breadth, and looked into the face of an old woman with iron-gray hair and a tray. The woman did not gasp. She did not curtsy. She looked at Isolde with a steady, considering look and said, in a voice pitched to the same low frequency as the knock, "My lady, I am Henrika Boole. I am the king's keeper of the chamber. May I come in?" "He is sleeping," Isolde whispered. "I know, my lady, that is why I have come quietly. I have brought breakfast for two. I will leave it on the table by the hearth and withdraw." Isolde stepped back. Henrika came in. The old woman moved through the chamber with the particular silent efficiency of someone who had been moving through this chamber, in silence, for a long time, and she set the tray down on the table by the hearth and turned and looked, briefly, at the place on the rug where Vandren was sleeping, and her face did something Isolde did not know how to read. "He has not slept on a floor in 21 years, Henrika said quietly. "Not since he was 9. "I am sorry," Isolde said. "You are not sorry. You should not be sorry. I am only telling you, my lady, so that you understand what last night was." Henrika turned to leave. At the door she paused. "My lady." "Yes. There is a letter. It was pushed under the door in the 3rd hour. I have not opened it. The wax is a wax I do not know. I will leave it on the tray. The king will wish to see it the moment he wakes." She held out the letter. Isolde took it. The wax was the color of dried blood. The sigil pressed into it was a circle within a circle, with a single thorn cutting across both circles, and Isolde knew the sigil because it had been drawn on the wall above her bed in the house she had been raised in, every winter, every spring, every summer, every fall, every year of her life, until she ran. "I know this seal," she said. "I thought you might, my lady. It is the seal of the woman who raised me. I thought it might be." Isolde looked at Henrika. Henrika looked back. Henrika's face was calm and old and very tired, and there was, in the corner of her mouth, the faint flicker of a woman who had been holding her own counsel for a very long time and was beginning perhaps to be ready not to. "Henrika," Isolde said. "Yes, my lady." "How long have you served in this keep?" 41 years, my lady." "You served the king's father." "Yes." "You served the king's grandfather." "For the last 3 years of his life, yes." "Have you ever, in 41 years, seen the seal that is on this letter?" Henrika was silent for a moment. "Twice," she said. "The first time was the night the king's mother died. The second time was the night the king's father died. Both letters were burned before they could be read. My lady, the king will read this one, because he is the king he is, and not the kings before him. But I will tell you, since you have asked me, that the previous 2 letters with that seal preceded the deaths of the people they were sent to by, in the first case, 4 hours, and in the second, 2 days. Isolde's hand was very still on the letter. "Thank you, Henrika." "My lady. Go now. Please." Henrika went. Isolde stood with the letter in her hand and watched the rise and fall of Vandren's breath against the foot of the bed, and she made a decision. She crossed to the hearth. She lifted the iron poker. She slid the letter, sealed and unread, into the hot bed of the fire. It caught at once. The wax flared briefly green, which was a color wax should not flare, and then the paper curled and blackened and was gone, and the green light in the fire went out. And Isolde stood with the poker in her hand and her heart hammering and a small, fierce satisfaction in her chest that she had not felt in 11 days. She had done something. She had done something instead of being done to. It was the first thing. "You should not have burned that," Vandren said behind her. She turned sharply. He was awake. He was sitting up against the foot of the bed, and his eyes were on the fire, and she had not heard him move at all. "It was a letter from Madravorn," she said. "Yes." "You knew." "I knew there was a letter. I knew the seal. Henrika brought me word at the 2nd hour. Then you knew what it would say." "I knew what it would threaten. I did not know what it would offer. It offered nothing. Henrika told me. The previous letters with that seal preceded the deaths of 2 queens. It was not a letter to be read. It was a letter to be read, Vandren said quietly, and burned afterward. There may have been names in it. There may have been a date. There may have been the location of the riders inside the city. By burning it unread, my lady, you have spared me the offense and cost me the information. Isolde lowered the poker. She had not thought of this. She had thought of the green flare and the sigil and the satisfaction. She had not thought of the information. I am sorry, she said. Do not be sorry. I have made a mistake. You have made a choice. He was looking at her now, not at the fire, and his eyes were the same gray as last night but a softer gray in the morning, the gray of a river under sun. There is a difference, Isolde. A mistake is when you do not know what you are doing. A choice is when you do, and you do it anyway. You did it anyway. I did it because I did not want her words in this room. That is a reason. It is not a strategic reason. It is a reason, he said, and reasons that are not strategic are sometimes the only kind of reasons worth having. He rose. He rose stiffly, the way a man rises who has slept on a floor at 29 after 21 years of sleeping in a bed. He came toward the hearth. He stopped 2 paces from her. My lady, Vandren, will you eat with me? She looked at the table by the hearth, where Henrika had set the tray. 2 bowls of broth, a loaf of the dark high country bread, sliced, a small pot of pale honey, 2 cups, a pitcher of something steaming that smelled of bark and pepper. You knew I was from the high country, she said. I knew it from the way you spoke the name Thornmere, he said. You softened the M. That is a high country softening. It is not a southern softening. I had Henrika sent to the high country baker in the merchant's quarter at the 4th hour. You sent for high country bread for me. Yes. At the 4th hour of the night. Yes. She sat down at the table. She did not trust herself to stand any longer. He sat across from her. He did not eat. He waited until she had eaten, and only when she had eaten did he break a piece of the bread for himself, and as the steam rose from the cup between them, he began quietly to tell her about the curse the way she had not yet heard it. He told her about the night his 9th year had ended, about the small kitchen burn that had refused to heal because his hand, at 9, had begun to do what his blood had long been promising it would. About his mother's face when she understood. About the year of small fires after that, the year his mother had spent teaching him to keep his hands behind him, to keep his shoulders still, to keep the heat in his chest banked beneath ribs he was not yet old enough to call ribs. He told her about the day, 12 years later, when he had been 21, and his wolf had risen for the first time inside the keep, and the heat in his chest had gone with it, and a wing of the lower hall had filled with a thin smoke that no man could account for. The keep had not burned, but the rug in his chamber had charred at one corner where his wolf paw had stood. He had not let himself shift indoors since that day. 9 years of carrying his wolf folded under his skin, the way a man carries a banked forge across a long road. That is why, he said, I keep the chamber I keep. That is why there are no rugs except the one. That is why I sleep alone and have done since I was 21. The fire is not in my hand the way the rumor says. The fire is in my hand only when I touch what is alive. But heat is heat, my lady. And heat in a wooden building is a thing to be careful of. She listened. She did not interrupt. She watched his hands wrap around the cup and saw, with the clean, slow seeing of a person who had finally slept, that he was a man who had been alone for 21 years and was, this morning, not alone, and that the not alone of it was almost more than he could carry. Vandren, she said when he was done. Yes. Thank you for telling me. Thank you for listening. They had not yet finished the meal when the second knock came at the door. It was not Henrika's knock. It was a louder knock, 3 sharp strokes, and it was answered before Vandren had risen, by the door opening on its own, and a man stepping through it without invitation. He was a large man, near Vandren's height, with a close-cut iron-colored beard and the heavy plain coat of a war captain. He had the same gray eyes as Vandren, but darker, and Isolde understood, before he had spoken, that he was kin. "Cousin," Vandren said. He did not rise. "My king," the man said. His voice was a deep rasp. He had not yet looked at Isolde. He was looking at Vandren, and he was looking at the empty chair by the hearth, and at the rumpled bed, and at the hair wound twice around the smallest finger of Vandren's left hand, which Vandren had not bothered to hide. "Isolde," Vandren said, "this is my cousin and first captain, Bevan Halloway. Bevan, this is the Lady Isolde Thornemere. She is my guest. She will remain my guest. You will speak to her with the courtesy you would speak to any lady of this house." Bevan bowed. It was the bow of a man who had been ordered to bow, and Isolde, who had been raised by Madra Vorn and knew the difference between a bow given and a bow extracted, marked it. "My lady," Bevan said. "Captain." He turned to Vandren. "My king. The walls are held. The gate of the river is closed. The wolves of the second pack have swept the lower city, and we have taken 11 riders alive, of whom 3 have spoken and 8 have not. 2 of the 3 say the same thing. They were sent by a southern lady whose name they are afraid to speak, and they were sent for the girl, and they were told not to leave the reach without her body. The other who spoke gave us a name. The name is Vorn. I know the name. You know it. I know it. I have known it since last night." Bevan was silent. "My king, the Vorn are the line that placed the curse." "Yes." "And the Lady Isolde was raised in their house?" "Yes. She has told me. She told me last night." Bevan turned slowly and looked at Isolde for the first time. His look was not hostile. It was worse than hostile. It was the look of a man who was performing, in his head, a calculation, and Isolde knew the calculation because she had been trained to perform it herself, and the calculation was, what is the cost of killing this person now versus the cost of waiting? "Bevan," Vandren said softly. Bevan turned back to him. "Bevan, look at me." Bevan looked. "She is my guest," Vandren said. "She will remain my guest. She is not to be touched. She is not to be questioned. She is not to be looked at the way you have just looked at her. She has come into my house under my protection, and she is under my protection until she chooses to leave it, or until I am dead. Do you understand me? My king, do you understand me?" A long pause. "Yes, my king." "Good. Now, the 11 riders, hold them in the lower cells. Do not question them further until I am present. The 3 who spoke, separate from the 8 who did not. The wolves of the second pack are to remain on the walls. Send the third pack to the merchant's quarter. There will be a second wave, by water, before the third night. Madra Vorn does not move once. She moves 3 times. Tell the harbor master. Close the river gate. Now. My king. Go." Bevan went. The door closed behind him. Vandren sat very still at the table. His left hand, the one with the hair wound around the finger, had closed into a slow, tight fist on the wood, and Isolde could see the white at his knuckles. "Vandren. Yes. Your cousin. Yes. Your cousin has just decided that I should be killed. Yes. Will he act on it?" A long pause. "Not yet," Vandren said. She nodded slowly. She picked up her cup, which had grown cool, and she drank the rest of the tea. "Vandren. Yes. What did the riders look like? Isolde. What did they look like?" 2 of the 11 were men of the high country. The other 9 were southern. The 2 of the high country wore an unmarked livery, black with no device. They were not the Vorn livery. No. The Vorn livery has the thorn in a circle. These were nothing. Then they were not Madras. Or not only Madras. There is a second player, Vandren. There is someone else moving. He looked at her sharply. How do you know this? Because Madra Vorn has hunted me for 11 days with her own livery on every rider, Isolde said. She has not hidden. She has not been ashamed. The thorn in circle has been the brand on every horse that came near me. If the riders inside your city wear black with no device, then either Madra has sent unmarked riders for the first time in her life, or someone else has put riders into your city, and they are using the chaos of her hunt to get to me first. Who else would want you? She closed her eyes. She had been afraid of this question. She had been afraid of it since the moment Bevan had spoken the word Vorn aloud. Vandren! Yes. My mother left me a letter. I read it on the road. There was a thing in the letter I have not told you yet. Tell me. My mother was not a Vorn servant. My mother was a Vorn cousin. She was the younger sister of Madra Vorn's mother. She fled the house when she was 19, and she changed her name. And she went into service in a different Vorn household under that changed name, and she was discovered, when I was 9, and brought back, and made to give me up. Madra raised me. But my mother, before she died, wrote that there is one other living Vorn, a man, Madra's brother. He has been in exile for 30 years. He has been gathering, in his exile, a faction. He believes Madra is too cautious. He believes the curse should have been finished a generation ago. He believes I am the weapon, and he does not believe Madra should be the one to wield me. His name? Orlan. Orlan Vorn. Yes. Vandren sat back in his chair. So, he said quietly, we have not one enemy in this room. We have two, and they are racing each other for you. Yes, and the one who reaches you first will use me to kill you, she said. Yes. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Isolde. Yes. There is a thing I would like to do. It is not strategic. It is, in fact, unwise. But I would like to do it, and I would like to ask your permission first. What is it? He reached across the table. He did not touch her. He laid his hand on the wood, palm up, in the space between their cups, and he waited. I have not held a woman's hand, he said, since I was 9 years old. The hand you took in the alley last night was the first. I would like, if you will allow it, to hold yours again. In daylight, without the alarm bells, while we are eating bread together, so that I will remember, if the next 3 days go badly, that I held it once in the morning, by a fire, with a woman who knew my name. Isolde reached across the table. She put her hand in his. His palm was warm and dry and unburned, and the bell in her chest, which had been a low, warm hum, rose very softly to a clear, single note, the way a bell rises when a hand rests, deliberately, on its rim. They sat that way for a long time. The hearth shifted. The bread cooled. A cool draft moved at the high window. Outside, far below, in the lower city, a man Isolde had never met was watching the gate of the keep through a glass from a tavern window, and that man was sending a small bird north with a small message tied to its leg, and the message said only, "She is inside. He has given her his chamber. Move now." The man's name was not in the message. The man's name was Henrika Bull's son, who had been turned, the previous winter, by a gold the old woman his mother had not been able to match. By the second afternoon, the keep had become a kind of held breath. Vandren did not sleep. He had slept the one night on the rug, and that one night seemed to have been the whole of the sleep he was prepared to allow himself for the duration of the crisis. He moved through the corridors with the wolves of the inner pack at his heels, and the captains of the 3 packs in and out of the great map room at all hours, and Isolde, who had been given a smaller chamber adjoining the king's at her own quiet insistence, watched him through the half-open door and saw a man who had spent his life learning to function on no rest at all, and was functioning now. She was not allowed to leave the 2 chambers. He had not phrased it as a command. He had phrased it as a kindness, in the way of a man who knew that a command would have made her bristle. "My lady, until the third night is past, I would be very glad if you did not pass beyond this corridor." She had not bristled. She had nodded. She had spent the second day sitting in the high window of the smaller chamber, watching the river through the narrow slot, and trying to think. She was thinking about the letter. The letter had threatened to burn the keep with him in it on the third day. The letter had been Madra's, and Madra's threats were never theater. Madra's threats were schedules. Whatever was coming on the third night, and Vandren was preparing for it as if it were a siege. But Isolde knew Madra in a way Vandren did not, and she knew Madra did not lay sieges. Madra slipped in. Madra came in by the back kitchen door while everyone was watching the front gate. She thought, also, about Henrika's son. Henrika had been kind to her. Henrika had brought her bread. Henrika had told her plainly what the previous letters with the Vorn seal had meant. Isolde had no doubt of Henrika herself. But she had been raised by Madra Vorn, and Madra Vorn had taught her, before she had taught her to read, that the surest way into a guarded house was to turn a child of someone trusted, because a child was a thing the trusted person could not bring herself to suspect. Madra had done it before. Madra had probably done it in this keep already. If Madra had a way in, the way in would not be Henrika. The way in would be someone Henrika loved. Isolde sat at the high window and turned the question over and turned it over and decided, by the close of the second afternoon, that it was a thing Vandren needed to hear. On the second evening she went to find him. He was in the map room. The map room was a long stone hall with a great oak table in the center, and on the table was a leather map of the Iron Reach the size of a bedsheet, and the map was strewn with small carved wolves of 3 colors. And Vandren was standing with his hands flat on the edge of the table looking down at the carved wolves, and Bevan was across from him. And 3 other captains she did not know were ranged along the sides, and they were arguing. They stopped when she came in. Bevan's face closed. The other 3 captains, who did not yet know who she was, looked at Vandren for instruction. Vandren did not give them any. He straightened from the table and he came around it to her, and he took her hand in front of all of them, and he turned to face them with her hand in his. "Captains," he said, "this is the Lady Isolde Thornemere. She will be standing beside me at the third night. She will be standing beside me at every council from this night forward. You will speak in her presence as you would speak in mine." Bevan's jaw set. "My king." "Yes, Bevan." "With respect." "Yes." "You have known this woman 2 days. I have known her 1 moon less than I have needed to know her. That is a full enough acquaintance for me. Continue with your objection if you have one." Bevan was silent. The 3 other captains looked at one another, and then at the table. The oldest of them, a woman with a long gray plait and a face like weathered teak, made a small sound that was almost a laugh. "Well," the woman said, "I had wondered what it would take to crack you, my king. I am glad to know." "Thank you, Captain Dorith." "Welcome, my lady," Dorith said to Isolde, and inclined her head. And Isolde understood, with the small, clear understanding of a woman who has been read by another woman, that Dorith was the captain who would not need to be persuaded, and would also be the one to watch. They went back to the map. Isolde stood at Vandren's right hand and looked at the carved wolves. The black wolves were the inner pack, the brown were the second, the gray were the third. They were arranged along the walls and at the gates and at the river. She looked at them for a long time and then she said, without lifting her eyes, "You have no wolves at the cisterns." Bevan's head came up. "The cisterns are inside the walls," he said. "Yes." "The cisterns are not an entry point." "The cisterns are fed from the upper springs," Isolde said. "The upper springs are outside the walls. The pipes come down through the rock, and they are wide enough at the source for a small man, or a small woman, to enter. I have read this, in a pamphlet, on the road." The captains looked at her. "My lady," Dorothy said carefully, "the cistern pipes are not wide enough for a man to enter at the keep end. They narrow." "Yes," Isolde said, "but they do not narrow for the first 100 yards. The first 100 yards are wide, and the first 100 yards include, according to the pamphlet, a maintenance hatch that has not been opened in 80 years. A silence. "Where?" Vondran said. "In the lower cellars, behind the salt store." The pamphlet did not say, but my mother told me when I was small that her grandfather had worked, as a young man, in the cellars of a high country keep that had the same design, and she said there was always a hatch behind the salt because salt was heavy and would not be moved often, and a hatch behind the salt could be left untended for a generation. Bevan was very still. Dorothy said, "I will take 6 wolves to the salt store now." "Take 12, Vondran said, "and take a torch with green oil. If anything is in the pipe, it will not bear the green oil." And Dorothy, "Yes. Do not take Henrika's son. Hold him instead in the south guardroom under quiet escort. He is to be questioned at first light, but not before. And he is not to know he is being held. Do you understand?" Dorothy's eyes narrowed. "My king. He has been seen at a tavern window with a glass on the keep gate, twice, by 2 different scouts, in 2 different evenings. He has been writing. He has been sending. I do not yet know who has been paying him, but I know he is paid. Henrika does not yet know. I will tell her myself in the morning before he is questioned. That is also a thing I am asking of you. Henrika is not to be the one to learn it from a runner." Dorothy nodded once. "Yes, my king." Dorothy went. The 2 other captains went with her. Bevan did not go. Bevan stood across the table and looked at Vondran, and Vondran looked back, and a long quiet passed between them that Isolde could feel along her skin. "Cousin," Bevan said at last. "Yes. Henrika's son was raised in this keep." "I know. Henrika's son was named after my own father." "I know that also." "You are accusing him of treason on the word of a girl who 2 nights ago you did not know." "I am not accusing him on her word. I am accusing him on the word of 2 scouts, taken in 2 different evenings, before the Lady Isolde was in this keep at all. The Lady Isolde gave me the question. The scouts gave me the answer. Those are different things, Bevan." Bevan was breathing harder. Isolde saw, for the first time, that he was not angry. He was afraid. He was afraid in the particular way of a man who had been sure of a thing all his life and was being asked, in front of him, to be unsure. "Bevan," Vondran said gently, "I have known the boy since he was born. So have you. If I am wrong, I will go to him at first light and say so, and I will stand in front of his mother while I do. But tonight, he sleeps in the south guard room, not in the cellar with the salt, and not at any wall that backs onto the river. Tonight is not a night for being uncertain about a man who has been seen at a tavern window with a glass on my gate." Bevan closed his eyes. "My king. Yes. If you are wrong about this, you will have done a thing to that boy, and to his mother, that you cannot take back. I know. And if you are right." "If I am right," Vondran said, "I have already done the thing I cannot take back. And it was done years ago. And it was done by him." Bevan turned. He went out. The door closed behind him. Isolde was left alone with Vondran at the map. She could not look at him. She looked instead at the carved wolves on the leather, and she thought that she had just made him doubt a man who had been raised under his own roof, and she thought, "What if I am wrong?" And she thought, "What if I am right, and he hates me for being right?" And the bell in her chest, which had been a clear, single note since the morning, rang harder, the way a bell rings when the weather is about to change. "Isolde." "Yes." "Look at me." She looked at him. He was not angry. He was not afraid. He was looking at her with the same careful gray patience he had looked at her with in the alley, and he said, "You did not have to tell me." "I did." "You did not have to tell me," he said. You could have kept it. You could have let the cellar be unguarded tonight. You could have let him, if he is what we suspect, do whatever he meant to do. You could have let me die, and the curse with me, and you could have walked out of this keep at dawn with no one alive who knew your name. You could have. And you told me instead. Why? She did not answer for a long moment. Then she said, because the bell will not stop ringing. The bell. In my chest. Since the throne room. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were the river ice gray again, but softer, and he held out his hand, and she put hers in it. My lady. Yes. There is a thing the old laws of the Holloway line allow. It is a thing that has not been done in 5 generations. It is called a seal of witness. It is not a marriage. It is not a betrothal. It is a thing 2 people do in the presence of a witness when they wish to place themselves under each other's protection in a way that the law will recognize. It does not require love. It does not require certainty. It requires only that both parties speak the words and that one witness, of any rank, hear them spoken. Why are you telling me this? Because if you take the seal of witness with me tonight, then under the laws of the Iron Reach, no one in my household, including my first captain, including my chamberkeeper, including any wolf of any pack, may lift a hand against you without lifting it against me. It will not protect you from Madra Vorn. It will not protect you from her brother. But it will protect you, Isolde, from the people inside these walls. And tonight, I think the people inside these walls are the people I cannot, any longer, promise you against. She looked at him. You are asking me, she said slowly, to bind myself to you. 2 days after we met. While we still do not know whether I am the curse. Yes. Vandren. If I am the curse, the seal will bind you to your own death. Yes. You are asking anyway. I am asking anyway. Why? Because if I am to die in a moon, he said, I would like to die having stood before a witness with you. I have stood before witnesses my whole life, and never with someone of my own choosing. I would like, once, to choose. And if I am not to die, my lady, then I would like, very much, the rest of my life to begin tonight. In this room, with you, in the only way the law of my house allows me to begin it, before I have had the chance to court you properly, which I have not had, and which I would very much like to do, afterward, slowly, over a great many breakfasts. She laughed. It came out cracked, the way her laugh in the alley had come out cracked, but it was a laugh, and it surprised her, and it surprised him, and his face, the face that had been carved out of stone in the throne room, did the small soft thing it had done in the alley, which was to almost smile. Vandren Holloway, she said. Yes. I will take the seal of witness with you. Now. Now. He turned to the door. He did not need to call. Dorothy, who had not yet left for the cellar, was already standing in the threshold with her gray plait over her shoulder and a face that suggested she had been listening shamelessly through the door, and she came in without invitation, and she said, My king, my lady, I will witness. They spoke the words. The words were old. They were in a tongue that Isolde half knew, the tongue of the high country before it was the high country, and Vandren spoke them slowly, and Isolde repeated them, and Dorothy, with the formal voice of a captain on the field, said the witnessing line at the close, and then Vandren took a small knife from his belt and pricked the meat of his own thumb, and pricked the meat of Isolde's thumb, and pressed them together. And a single drop of mingled blood fell onto the leather of the map, between 2 carved wolves, one black and one not yet painted, and the seal of witness was made. The bell in Isolde's chest, at the moment the blood touched the leather, did not ring. It answered. It rang back, a deeper note, from somewhere not in her chest, but a great distance away. As if a second bell, a much larger one, somewhere out in the dark country beyond the keep, had heard the small bell in her chest and had rung in response. Vandren had heard it too. She saw it in his face. "What was that?" she whispered. He did not answer. Dorith had gone very still. "My king," Dorith said. "That was not the seal." "No," Vandren said. "That was something else." "Yes." "That was a Vorn bell." "Yes." A horn sounded outside the keep. It was a long horn, low and hoarse, and it came from the river. And Isolde knew the horn, because Madra Vorn had blown it, on the last day of every winter, since Isolde was 9 years old, to call her household to the courtyard for the changing of the standards. She knew also, because she had been raised in that household, what the horn meant when it was blown out of season. It meant, "I have arrived." The door of the map room burst open. It was not Bevan. It was a young runner, a girl of perhaps 13, with her face white as paper and her hair half out of its braid, and she fell against the doorframe and gasped, "My king, the cisterns, Captain Dorith, the cisterns, the hatch behind the salt." It was already open. There were already people through. "They have, my king. They have taken the lower hall. They have taken the Lady Henrika. They are using her as a shield. They are coming up. They are coming up the back stair. They are, my king." "Breathe, child," Dorith said. The girl breathed. "They have a banner," she gasped. "It is not the thorn and circle, it is black. It is plain black. With nothing on it. My king. The plain black is in your house." Vandren's hand closed over Isolde's. "Orlan Vorn," he said softly. "Yes," Isolde whispered. The horn blew again. It blew, this time, from inside the keep walls. Isolde Thornmere, freshly sealed of witness to the cursed wolf of the Iron Reach, with her thumb still wet with their mingled blood and the bell in her chest still answering a deeper bell out in the dark, turned toward the door of the map room and felt, for the first time in 11 days, the slow, heavy heat that rises in the body of a wolf before its first true shift. She had never shifted in her life. She had been told in the Vorn house that she could not, that the curse line did not shift, that she had been bred for one purpose, and shifting was not it. The heat was rising anyway. The heat was rising along her spine, and her vision was beginning to do a strange thing, sharpening at the edges and blurring at the center, and she heard, somewhere very far away, Vandren saying her name, and she heard, much closer, the sound of boots on the back stair. She turned to face the door, her last clear human thought, before the heat at her spine became something her body could no longer hold, was that her mother had lied to her about a great many things, and one of them had been about what she could do. The boots reached the corridor outside. The doors flew open. And Isolde Thornmere, who had been bred to be a weapon and had never been told what kind, began, in the map room of the Iron Reach, with her king's blood mingled on her thumb and a witness standing over her shoulder, to change. The first thing she lost was language. Words had always been the inside of Isolde's mind. She had thought in words, dreamed in words, run for 11 days on a chain of words she repeated to herself, and now the words were being pulled out of her one at a time as if a hand were drawing thread from a spool, and when the thread ran out there would be nothing left of her that could think. She fought it. She fought it the way she had fought everything for 11 days, which was to say, she did not try to win, only to keep her feet. She kept her feet. The map room tilted around her. The carved wolves on the leather slid sideways. Dorith was speaking. Vandren was speaking. The runner girl in the doorway was no longer in the doorway. She was on her hands and knees, sliding backward, and behind her in the corridor were men. 3 men. 5. 8. They wore the plain black livery and their faces were uncovered, and the man at the front had a sword already drawn, and Isolde saw, with the part of her vision that had begun to sharpen at the edges, that the sword was wet. She knew whose blood was on the sword. There was a crumpled shape at the threshold of the map room. Iron gray hair, a plain dark dress. A tray, fallen, with a teapot rolling slowly across the stone. Henrika. Henrika had not been a shield. Henrika had been an obstacle, and the obstacle had been removed, and the runner girl had not understood what she had seen and had told it wrong. And now Henrika was on the threshold of the map room, with her hand still curled around the handle of a teapot she had been carrying upstairs to the king and his lady, because the third hour of the evening was tea time, and Henrika had served tea at the third hour for 41 years. Isolde understood, in the last clean second before the words ran out, that Henrika's son had told them where his mother would be at the third hour of the evening, and that the men in the corridor had used the knowledge to come up the back stair behind her, and that Henrika had turned at the wrong moment with a teapot in her hand, and the woman was dead. The grief went into the heat in her spine like water into a forge. Her vision blew open. The map room did not get larger. She got larger. She felt all along the inside of her skin the slow, terrible unfolding of a body that had been folded, since her 9th year, in a shape too small for it. Her shoulders were widening, her hands, her mouth, the bones of her face. The Vorn house had told her she could not shift. The Vorn house had told her many things. The Vorn house had told her, every winter, that the bell in her chest was a sickness, and would be cut out of her if it ever rang. The bell rang now. It rang at the same moment her spine completed its unfolding, and the second note, the deeper note, the bell out in the dark country, answered it again, closer now. Much closer. She fell forward onto her hands. Her hands were not hands. They were the long, broad paws of a wolf, and the wolf was not the silver white of the inspirational tales she had heard whispered in the Vorn kitchens. The wolf was the color of river ice, the same gray as Vandren's eyes. A pale, clean gray, almost white, with a darker gray along the spine and the long throat. And Isolde, who had a moment before been thinking in words, now thought in the wordless, rapid pictures of an animal that had been born already running. She turned. Vandren was beside her. He had not yet shifted. He was still in his man's body, and his hand was on her shoulder, on the place where her shoulder had been a moment before, and where now there was the bunched muscle of a wolf the size of a yearling stag, and his face was white. He was not afraid of her. She understood this with the wordless clarity of the new shape. He was afraid for her. Until this moment he had not known that she could shift. Until this moment, neither of them had known what the Vorn house had bred her to be. The first man came through the door. He came through the door with his sword raised and his face set in the particular blank arrangement of a man who had been promised gold for a piece of work and had decided, on the way up the stairs, not to think about the work. He saw Vandren. He swung. He did not see the wolf. The wolf was at his throat before the swing was finished. Isolde, inside the wolf, did not decide to move. She watched herself move. The wolf's body knew what it was doing the way a river knows how to find a sea, and the sword arm came down on empty air, and the man's throat opened, and he was on the floor before his sword had reached the place where Vandren's shoulder had been. The second man saw. The second man stopped. The third and fourth, behind him, stopped also, and the corridor outside the map room held one long stretched second of perfect quiet, and into the quiet Vandren said, very softly, in the voice he had used in the alley, "Step away from her." The men did not step away. They were Orlan Vorn's men, and they had been told by Orlan, who had been told by the spies he had placed in the Vorn kitchens 20 years ago, what Isolde was. They had been promised that she would be useful to them, not dangerous. They had been told that the bell in her chest could not ring without a Vorn's permission, that the shift could not happen without a Vorn's blood, that the curse girl was a tool, was a key, was a finished weapon waiting for a hand to lift her. They had not been told that the seal of witness, mingled with a Halloway king's blood on a leather map, had given the shift the permission it had been waiting 9 years for. The second man recovered first. He charged. He charged at Isolde, Not at Vandren, because he had been told that the king was not the priority. The king was the prize. The king was the man Orlan Vorn meant to take alive and break slowly over the course of a single moon for the satisfaction of breaking what 9 generations of Vorn women had only been able to curse from a distance. The girl was the inconvenience. The girl had to be put down. He got within 2 paces of her. Isolde's wolf moved. The wolf moved without her, again, and she watched, again, the way a person watches a lightning strike, with the wolf's body doing the lightning. The man was inside the door. The wolf was inside the man. The man was on the floor. The third and fourth came together, and the wolf took them together, and there was a great deal of noise that Isolde, inside the wolf, could not quite hear, because the wolf's ears were not interested in the noise of dying men. The wolf's ears were turned toward the corridor, where there were more boots coming up the stair, and toward the stair beyond the corridor, where there were more boots beyond that, and toward the great courtyard far below, where there was, she now understood, the second bell. The second bell was not a bell. The second bell was Madra Vorn. Madra had come up the river, while Orlan had come through the cisterns, and Madra was in the courtyard now, on a pale horse with her white hair loose under a hood, and the deeper note that had been ringing back to Isolde's bell was the resonance of Madra's curse blood, calling to the curse blood in Isolde's veins, the way a mother calls a daughter home in a voice that does not have to be loud. Isolde, inside the wolf, knew this. The wolf, inside Isolde, did not care. The wolf had spent 9 years folded into a shape too small, and the wolf was unfolding now with the terrible patience of a thing that had been promised, all its life, that it could not exist, and the wolf was going to exist as much as it possibly could, and it was going to exist in the direction of the men in the corridor first, and the woman in the courtyard second, and after that, the wolf would see. Vandren shifted. He had not shifted indoors since he was 21. He had carried his wolf, all those years, just under his skin, the way a man carries a banked forge across a long road. He had told her, that morning, why. He had told her about the rug and the wing of smoke, and the corner of the chamber that had charred. He had told her, and she had listened, and now, for the first time in 9 years, he was opening the forge inside his own walls. The forge opened. The map room filled with light. It was not the light of an actual fire. The fire stayed in his palms, where the curse had always lived, and where, this evening, it had finally gone quiet. The light was something else. It was the light a wolf gives off when the wolf has been kept folded for 9 years and unfolds. Finally, with a king's permission. And the light was the gray of river ice in the morning, and at the heart of the light was a wolf as tall at the shoulder as a tall man, with fur that was nearly the same gray as Isolde's own, and eyes that were the eyes she had looked into across 200 candles 2 nights before. He was not burning. The recognition had been true. The curse, at the moment Isolde had taken the seal of witness with him, and the bell in her chest had answered the bell out in the dark, had ended, and the heat that had banked in his hands for 21 years was now simply the heat of a wolf, the ordinary heat of a Holloway king at his proper size, and his eyes met hers over the bodies of 3 men, and the wordless clarity of the new shape passed between them in a single look. "With me," his look said. "With you," hers answered. They went through the door together. It was not a battle. It was not the kind of thing that could be remembered afterward as a battle. Isolde would remember, the way one remembers a dream, certain images that did not connect. The narrow stair turning. A man in plain black livery falling backward with his torch still in his hand, and the torch landing on a tapestry and the tapestry beginning, slowly, to burn. Dorothy somewhere behind them, shouting orders Isolde could not understand. Bevan further back, somewhere on the floor below, his voice raised in the war bark that Holloway captains had used since the founding to call the second pack to a corridor. The corridors were not empty. Orlan had brought 30 men through the cistern. They had taken the lower hall, the kitchens, the back stair, the salt store, and they had been climbing toward the map room when the lady they had been promised would be a tool turned into something that ate them in the corridor. It took, by the count of Captain Dorot's report afterward, 11 minutes. It felt, to Isolde, like one long breath. She came back to herself in the great courtyard. She came back to herself because the wolf had run out of corridor. She came back also because the second bell, the deeper bell, had begun to ring at a pitch that the wolf could not ignore. And the wolf had carried her, with Vandrin beside her, down the great stair of the keep, and across the inner courtyard, and out through the broken inner gate into the great courtyard, where there was a pale horse, and on the pale horse there was a woman. Madra Vorn was 63 years old. She did not look it. She had the face of a woman of 40, smooth and fine-boned, with the white hair that ran in the Vorn line, and which Isolde had inherited a paler version of without ever knowing it was a Vorn mark. She was sitting very still on the pale horse. She was wearing a traveling coat the color of dried blood. She had no guard. She had brought no soldiers. She had come, as she always came, alone. Because Madra Vorn did not need soldiers. She was the soldier her line had spent 9 generations sharpening into a single point. She looked down at the 2 wolves coming out of the gate, and she smiled. "Isolde, my heart," she said, in the same voice she had used to say, "Come to bed every winter night of Isolde's childhood. Come here." The wolf inside Isolde did not move. "Come here, my heart," Madra said again. The deeper bell rang harder. Isolde felt it in the marrow of the wolf's bones. It was a summons. It was the summons her line had been built to answer. The call of the Curseblood elder to the Curseblood younger, and Madra was using it now with the full weight of 63 years of practice. The wolf's paws began, against Isolde's will, to step forward. 1 step, 2. Vandrin did not stop her. She would think about this later, with a kind of awe. He could have stopped her. He could have moved between her and the woman on the horse. He could have lunged for the horse. He could have torn Madra Vorn from the saddle and ended the night in the next 10 seconds with his teeth. He did not. He stood at her shoulder, in his wolf's body, and he watched her take the steps. And he did the only thing that was, in the end, the right thing, which was to trust her. The wolf took the 3rd step. The wolf took the 4th. On the 5th, Isolde, inside the wolf, did the thing she had been preparing to do for 11 days without knowing it. She remembered her mother. She remembered her mother's letter, opened in the back of a hay cart south of the Veche, written in a hand that had grown shakier with each line because the hand had been writing while its owner was dying. "My Isolde, the bell will ring in you. When it rings, do not let her tell you what it means. The bell is yours. The bell has always been yours. Madra has spent her life telling you the bell belongs to her. It does not. The bell is a Thornamere bell. The Vorn curse only works because the curse line has convinced the bell line that the bells belong to them. They do not. They never did. Trust the bell. Trust nothing else." Isolde, inside the wolf, trusted the bell. The bell stopped answering Madra's bell. It was the simplest thing. It was the way a child stops answering a call that has gone on too long. Isolde, in the marrow of the wolf, simply turned her attention away from the deeper bell ringing out of Madra Vorn's chest and toward the smaller, clearer bell that had been ringing in her own chest since the throne room. The bell that had answered a king across 200 candles, the bell that was hers, that had always been hers, that the Vorn house had spent 9 years telling her was a sickness because they had needed her to believe it was theirs. The deeper bell faltered. Madra felt it falter. Madra's smooth face did a thing it had not done in front of Isolde in 9 years, which was to be afraid. "Isolde," she said, sharper now. "Come here." Isolde stopped walking. The wolf turned around. The wolf walked, 3 steps, back to the side of the king who had carried her up a bluff, and slept on a rug at the foot of his own bed, and held her hand in the morning over a high country breakfast, and stood at her shoulder while she stepped toward the woman who had raised her on lies. And the wolf put its great gray head against the king's great gray shoulder, and the bell in Isolde's chest rang, alone, clear, hers. Madra drew a knife. It was a small knife. It was not a knife meant for a fight. It was a knife meant for a ritual, with a hooked blade and a handle of dark bone. And Isolde knew the knife because Madra had used it, every winter, to cut a single thin line down the inside of Isolde's wrist on the longest night of the year, to feed the curse. My heart, to feed the curse. Madra raised the knife to her own throat. "If I cannot have you," she said, in the perfectly even voice she had used to read bedtime stories, "I will have his death at least. The curse takes its price at the death of the curse-bearer. If I die now, with you in his presence, the price will move into him. He will burn from the inside by midnight, and your love will not save him, because love only saves the king if the curse is unbroken at the moment the curse-bearer dies. Good night, my heart." The knife moved. It did not reach her throat. A small bird, no larger than a fist, came out of the dark over the courtyard and struck the back of Madra's wrist with the speed of a thrown stone. It was not, Isolde would understand later, a real bird. It was a thing made of paper, and a thing made of breath, and it had been thrown by Captain Dorith from the high window of the map room 3 floors above the courtyard, and Dorith had been a thrower of paper birds, in her youth in the high country, before she had been a captain of the Iron Reach. The knife fell from Madra's hand. Madra looked up. She looked for the first time not at Isolde but at the keep, and she saw the high window, and she saw Dorith in it, and she saw, for one unguarded second, that she had not accounted for the high country. The Vorn line had spent 9 generations preparing for a Halloway king. The Vorn line had not spent any generations preparing for a high country captain with good aim. The wolf moved. Isolde, inside the wolf, moved with it for the first time as a single thing rather than a passenger. The wolf went up the side of the pale horse the way water goes up a riverbank in flood, and the wolf took Madra Vorn not by the throat, but by the wrist of the hand that had held the knife, the wrist that had held the knife every winter for 9 years, and the wolf brought her down off the horse into the snow of the courtyard, and the wolf did not kill her. The wolf held her. Isolde, inside the wolf, looked down into the face of the woman who had raised her on lies, and she did not rip the throat out of that face, and she did not break the wrist she had taken, and she only held Madra against the snow with her teeth set to the pulse point of the wrist, and her gray eyes on Madra's white-blue eyes, and she waited. The courtyard filled with wolves. The second pack came through the inner gate. The third pack came through the outer. Bevan came through the broken doorway of the keep with blood down the side of his face and his sword in his hand, and he stopped, and he saw his cousin in his wolf's body unburned beside the curse girl in her wolf's body, holding Madra Vorn in the snow, and he understood, in the slow, heavy understanding of a man whose worldview has just been rearranged, that he had been wrong about a great many things. Dorith came down from the high window. Orlin Vorn, somewhere in the keep above, was already dead, taken in the corridor by the captains of the second and third packs, while their king was downstairs in the courtyard, and the plain black livery had been gathered into a heap in the lower hall, and the night, very slowly, was ending. It was Dorith who took Madra into custody. She did it with the formal courtesy of a captain who had been a thrower of paper birds in her girlhood, and had not forgotten how to be courteous to a woman she had just disarmed. She did it without speaking. She took the small bone-handled knife from the snow, and put it in a leather pouch, and put the pouch inside her coat, and she lifted Madra Vorn to her feet, and she walked her, slowly, toward the inner gate, and Isolde, in her wolf's body, watched her go. The wolf inside Isolde began, at last, to fold back. It folded back gently this time. It was not the violent unfolding of the map room. It was the slow easing of a thing that had run as far as it needed to run, and it folded itself down, fur and bone and breath, until Isolde was kneeling in the snow of the courtyard in her own body, in a torn dress, with her hands flat on the stones, and her hair loose, and her thumb still wet with the mingled blood of the seal of witness. Vandrin shifted beside her. He came down on one knee beside her, the way he had knelt in the alley, and he took her face in both his hands, and his hands were warm on her face, and they did not burn her, and his face, this close, was the face of a man who had not died. Isolde. Vandrin. You came back. I came back. I did not know if you would. Neither did I. He pressed his forehead to hers. They knelt that way in the snow for a long time, with the second pack and the third pack, and the captains and the wounded and the bodies and the smoking tapestry of the back stair all around them, and the bell in Isolde's chest, the small clear hers bell, rang once, finally, steadily, the way a bell rings when it has finished its long journey of finding what it was made to ring for. Then Vandrin said very quietly, "My lady, I think we should go inside." She laughed. It was not a cracked laugh this time, it was a whole one. "Yes," she said. "I think we should." The trials of Madra Vorn took a full moon. She was given, by Vandrin's own writ, the same protections that any prisoner of the Iron Reach was given, which were considerable, because Vandrin Halloway had drafted, at 25, the cleanest prisoner protections in 7 kingdoms, and he had not stopped applying them at 30, just because the prisoner had spent her entire life trying to kill him. She was given a defender. She refused him. She was given a chair. She refused it. She stood every day of the moon in the great hall of Caervale in front of a panel of 9 witnesses drawn from the 3 packs and the high country and the merchants' quarter and the river towns, and she answered every question put to her with the perfect courtesy of a woman who had decided on the first day that since the curse had failed, the only dignity remaining to her was to make the failure as elegant as possible. She was found guilty of 9 counts, conspiracy across 9 generations counted by the laws of the Reach as a single ongoing crime, and so she was sentenced for 1. The sentence was exile. She was sent by longboat to the small island of Calver, which lay 60 miles off the western coast and had no inhabitants except for the lighthouse keeper and a colony of seabirds. She was given 3 years of provisions and a single small house and a fishing boat that, by the design of its hull, could not survive open water. She was permitted no correspondence. She was permitted no visitors. She was permitted, the writ said, the rest of her natural life on Calver, alone with the seabirds. She accepted the sentence with a small bow. On the dock, before she boarded, she turned to Isolde, who had come down to the harbor to see her off because Vandrin had asked her if she wished to, and she had said yes. "My heart," Madra said. "Do not call me that. My heart. I will say one thing. You will hate me for it. It does not matter. The thing is true. I loved you, Isolde. I loved you the whole 9 years. The fact that I was raising you to be a weapon does not change that I love the weapon. You will not believe it. You will not need to believe it. I am only saying it because we will not see each other again, and because I would rather you carried this, badly, than nothing." Isolde looked at her. She had expected to feel rage. She felt only, in the place where the rage should have been, a kind of cold, tired clarity, the clarity of a person who had stopped being a child sometime in the last moon and was looking, for the first time, at the woman who had raised her with adult eyes. "Madra," she said. "Yes." "I believe you." Madra's face did a small thing, not unlike the thing it had done in the courtyard. "I believe you loved me," Isolde said. "I also believe you were the worst thing that ever happened to me. Both are true. They will both keep being true. There is one other thing I will ask before you go." "Ask." "My brother. The one whose name you took from me when I was 9. The boy who was never permitted to come home, and who was sent on into the southern campaigns the year I was 12, while I was being told he had forgotten he had a sister. Where is he? Madra looked at her for a long moment. He is alive, she said. He is in the south. He does not know about me. He does not know about you. He was at the southern estate when your mother was brought back. He was never permitted to see her body, nor yours. He was told the fever had been quick, and that the burials had been done before the courier reached him, and the courier who carried that message was a man of mine who could be trusted to carry it well. He believes you both died of fever the winter your mother was returned. I let him believe it. It seemed kinder. Kinder to whom? To me, Madra said. It is only ever kinder to me. You knew that already. His name? Aaron Thornemere. He keeps horses now, on the coast. He has a wife. He has a small son. He has been happy, Isolde, in the way a person is happy when they have been told a kind lie and have built a life on it. I will leave it to you to decide whether to undo that. Isolde nodded, slowly. She had not let herself ask after her brother in 9 years. She had not, in fact, let herself say his name, because Madra had punished her for it the first 3 times she had tried, and after that, the name had gone into the place where she kept the things that hurt to look at directly, and it had stayed there until tonight. Goodbye, Madra, she said. Goodbye, my heart. Isolde turned. She walked back up the dock. She did not look back. Madra Vorn was rowed out to the longboat, and the longboat rowed her out into the western swell, and she was not seen again in the Iron Reach. Orlin was harder. Orlin had died in the corridor on the night of the breach, taken by a young wolf of the third pack who had not been told who he was, and had thought simply that a man with a sword in the king's corridor was a man who needed to be stopped. The young wolf had stopped him. The young wolf had then learned, the next morning, that he had killed the heir of the Vorn line, and the young wolf had wept for an hour in the courtyard, because young wolves of the third pack were trained to weep when they took a life, no matter whose, because Vandren Halloway had drafted that training also, at 26, after his first year on the throne. Orlin was buried in a plain grave outside the walls. The grave was unmarked, by Vandren's own order. No man of any house, the order read, should be made famous by his death. If he was not famous in his life for the right reasons, he will not be made famous by us for the wrong ones. Bury him plain. Henrika Boole was buried inside the walls. Henrika had a stone. The stone said her full name and the years of her service, and, beneath those, in letters that Vandren cut himself with a chisel because he would not let a stonemason do it, the words, "She brought tea to the king for 41 years, and she was killed bringing it. The king is sorry." Henrika's son, who had been arrested the night of the breach in the south guardroom and had broken on the 3rd day of questioning, was hanged in the lower courtyard, alone, without ceremony. He had told them everything by then, including the name of the gold that had bought him, which was a small Vorn agent who had been working out of the merchant's quarter for 20 years and was now also in the lower cells. Vandren went to the hanging himself. He stood at the back. He did not speak. Afterward he walked, alone, to Henrika's stone in the rain, and he stood there for a long time before he came back inside. Isolde did not go to the hanging. She did not need to. She did go, the next morning, to Henrika's stone, and she stood beside Vandren while he cut the words. She did not say anything. She had already said twice that he was not the one who had killed Henrika. He had already said twice that he was the one who had not protected her. They had agreed on the third saying, to disagree, and to let the disagreement stand, and to let the stone say what he had cut into it. Bevan came to the stone on the last day of the moon. He stood beside Vandren. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Cousin, yes. I was wrong. About the lady. About a great many things. I would like to say so. You have said so. I would like to say so to her." Vandren looked at Isolde. Isolde looked at Bevan. "Captain," she said. "My lady. You looked at me like a thing to be calculated, the first morning. In this keep? Yes. You will not look at me like that again. No, my lady. That is all, she said. That is the whole of it. He bowed. It was, this time, a bow given, not extracted, and it was deeper than the first. And Isolde inclined her head and turned and walked back across the courtyard, with her hand in Vandren's, and the matter of Bevan Halloway was over. They were married in the spring. It was not a choosing. The choosing, as a ceremony, was abolished by writ on the first day of the new year, and the 7 daughters who had been summoned to refuse Vandren in the autumn were each sent, with the king's apology, a single letter of release, and a small purse of gold sufficient to allow them, if they wished, to leave their fathers' houses for any life they preferred. Velis Ostwin, the small girl of 17 who had wept on the dais, used the gold to enroll in the river pilot's school at the harbor. She became, in time, one of the better river pilots of the Iron Reach. She wrote to Vandren, every winter, a single short letter to thank him for the gold and to report on the river. He kept the letters in a wooden box on the mantel of the chamber, beside the bowl of 3 river stones. Isolde, when she found them, did not say anything. She put the box back. She loved him, a little more, for the box. The wedding itself was small. It was held in the high country, at the edge of a lake that had been a Thornemere lake before it had been anyone's lake, and the 7 witnesses were the 7 captains of the 3 packs, with Bevan at their head and Dorith at his shoulder, and present also as honored guest, though not as a witness in the formal meaning, was the lighthouse keeper of Calver, who had been brought in by longboat for the day at Vandren's invitation, because the lighthouse keeper had once written a kind letter to the king's father about a debt that had nothing to do with anyone present, and Vandren had not forgotten. Isolde's brother was not there. She had written him a letter, a long one, in the 3rd week of the moon after the breach, and she had sent it south with a careful courier, and she had told him every true thing she had learned. He had written back in the 4th week. The letter was short. It said that he had wept for a day when it arrived, and that he loved her, and that he was not ready yet to come north. He asked if she would be patient. She had written back the same evening that she would be patient for as long as he needed, and that she would come south in the autumn if he wished it, and that she had a king now who would come with her if it would help. The reply came in the spring, 2 weeks before the wedding. Aaron would meet them in the autumn at the coast. So the wedding was small, but it was not the last gathering. It was the first. The bell in Isolde's chest, on the morning of the wedding, rang for the first time without any answer at all from anywhere. There was no second bell out in the dark country. There had not been one since the night of the courtyard. The bell that had been hers had, at some point in the moon since, become entirely hers, and it rang, on the morning of her wedding, in the simple sound of a thing finally and entirely at home. She wore the dress her mother had been buried in. It had been dug up. The Vorn household had been searched, after Madra's exile, by the captains of the 2nd pack, and her mother's grave had been found, and her mother's body had been moved to the high country with full honors, and the dress had been gently removed and washed and rehemmed, and Isolde had asked to wear it because her mother had not been allowed to wear a wedding dress in her life, and Isolde wished her mother, at last, to wear one. Vandren cried when he saw her in it. He did not try to hide it. He had cried, the first night, on his knees beside the bed when she was sleeping. He cried now, in the spring sun, in front of 7 captains and a lighthouse keeper. And he did not look away from her face while he cried, and Isolde walked the length of the lake meadow with her hand outstretched, and her mother's dress trailing in the spring grass, and she put her hand in the king's hand, and she said, in the high country tongue, and then in the tongue of the Iron Reach, I have come home to a house I had never seen. He answered in both tongues, the house has been waiting. They were married. There was no claiming bite. The Halloway line had never used one. They were married in the way of the high country, which was to drink from a single cup, and to eat from a single loaf, and to walk 3 times around a fire, and to be witnessed by 7, and the 7 witnessed, and the cup was drunk, and the loaf was eaten, and the fire was walked, and Vandren Halloway and Isolde Thornemere were a married thing. That night, in the small lakeside lodge, he held her for the first time. He held her carefully, the way a man holds something he has been told all his life he could not have. She held him back. They did not speak much. There had been a great deal of speaking in the moon since the courtyard, and tonight was not for speaking. The bell in her chest rang quietly all night, and she fell asleep, eventually, against his shoulder. And when she woke in the dawn, he was looking at her, and his eyes were the gray of river ice, and the lines around his mouth were not the lines of a man who had not slept in 21 years. They were the lines of a man who had slept, for the first time, beside a woman he loved. And he said, "Good morning, my lady. Good morning, my king. I have a question." "Yes? Will you have breakfast with me?" She laughed. She laughed against his shoulder, and the laugh was whole, and she said, "Yes. I will have breakfast with you. I will have breakfast with you every morning for the rest of our lives." In the autumn of the following year, a daughter was born to the Iron Reach. She was small. She had her mother's pale hair and her father's gray eyes, and she was placed, on the night of her birth, in a wooden cradle at the foot of the bed in the king's chamber. The cradle had been carved by Bevan, who had become, over the moon of the trials and the moon after, the kind of cousin who carved cradles. He had made it from the wood of the great oak that had stood in the inner courtyard for 400 years and had fallen, the previous winter, in a storm. The cradle had a single carved wolf on the headboard, and the wolf was the gray of river ice. Vandren looked at the daughter for a long time. He held her with the same care he had used to hold Isolde's hand the first time, in the alley, and he said, "What shall we name her?" Isolde, in the bed, exhausted and radiant, said, "Henrika." He looked up. "Henrika." "Yes, my lady." "It is a good name. It belongs to the keep. It belongs to a woman who brought tea up the back stair for 41 years and brought it the last time on the night her king needed her most. It belongs to her. We will give it back to her in a small girl, and we will let the small girl carry it." He bent his head. He cried again. He did not try to hide it again. He had grown, in the year of his marriage, into a man who did not try to hide things from his wife, and Isolde did not try to make him hide them. And the small girl Henrika, in his arms, looked up with her gray eyes at the gray eyes of her father, and made the small wordless sound that very new people make. Outside the high window in the courtyard, the wolves of the inner pack lifted their heads. They did not howl. The Halloway line had never been a howling line. They lifted their heads and they listened. And the bell in Isolde's chest, the small clear bell that was hers and had become, over the year, a deeper note in the wider music of the keep, rang once. It rang once for the daughter. Then it settled. And it was the daughter's bell now, also. And Isolde Halloway, who had been Isolde Thornemere, who had crossed the Veche in a hay cart and looked the cursed wolf in the eyes from behind a pillar and shifted in a map room with a king's blood on her thumb, lay back against the pillows in the chamber where she had first slept on the night of her arrival, and she watched her husband hold their daughter, and she understood that she had come home, finally, to a house she had never seen, and that the house had been waiting, and that the house had her now, and that she had it. She closed her eyes. The small girl made another wordless sound. The king, very softly, in the high country tongue, began to sing the lullaby that Henrika Boole had sung to him when he was 9, on the long nights after the curse first took him, in the chamber where this daughter would now grow. The lullaby was old. The lullaby was about a wolf who had been told all her life that she could not run, and who ran anyway, and who came at last to a country where the running was not necessary, and who lay down there, beside a fire, beside a man who had also been told he could not be loved, and who slept, finally, after a long journey. It was the right song. Outside, the wolves of the inner pack, who had not howled in 9 years, lifted their voices in a quiet, low, perfectly pitched chorus, and the chorus carried over the walls of the keep and down the bluff and across the river. And the keepers of the river towns lifted their heads and listened and smiled, because they knew, all of them, what such a song meant. It meant the long winter of the Holloway line was over. It meant the curse had ended, not in a death, but in a daughter. It meant the cursed wolf, who no woman had been willing to choose, had been chosen, in the end, by a runaway who had looked him in the eyes from behind a pillar, and had stayed, and had stayed, and had stayed, and was staying. And in the great tapestry of the kingdom's long telling of itself, a new thread was woven. The story of a king no woman would have, and a girl who had been raised to kill him, and the bell that rang between them across 200 candles, and the breakfast they ate together every morning afterward, for the rest of their long lives. They had found each other against everything they had been told. They were not parted again. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story.